Hi, everyone. It's Joe Veneri, the host of Fitt Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. Today, I'm joined by Anthony Geisler, founder and CEO of Xponential Fitness, a holding company of 9 boutique fitness brands, including Club Pilates, Barre, CycleBar, and others. In this episode, Anthony tells us how they managed to open new studios during the pandemic. We talk about how the Rumble acquisition came together, and Anthony explains why he's bullish on the return of in-person exercise. We also discuss what's next for Xponential, including more acquisitions, whether or not they'll launch connected fitness equipment, and the likelihood that they go public this year. A quick reminder before we get into today's show. Every Tuesday, we send a weekly newsletter filled with insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Join other decision makers and industry operators by subscribing at insider.fit.co. Let's get into it. Hi, Anthony. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to today's conversation. A lot to talk about. And I think to kick things off, can you just introduce yourself quickly and tell folks about Xponential? Like I mentioned offline, I'm sure folks, listeners know all about it, but it'd be great to get it straight from you.
Yeah, of course. Anthony Geisler, I'm the CEO and founder of Xponential Fitness. We are a brand portfolio company in the fitness space. So we own now 9 brands, which I'm sure we'll get into today with our acquisition of Rumble Boxing. But we own brands like Club Pilates, Barre, AKT Dance, Stretch Lab, Row House, Yoga 6, of course, Rumble, CycleBar. And so it's like naming your kids sometimes. I try and name all 9, but I probably always forget 1 or 2. But the concept is pretty simple. We started with Club Pilates and, we sold almost 1,000 of those and opened almost 700 of them. And, the stores are doing very well. And we wish we had, the ability to sell Club Pilates all over again and again. And we didn't, because you can obviously only be in one modality and sell at one time. You're not going to compete with yourself. And so, we kind of looked to what's next. And what's next was, bringing in a cycling modality and then, rowing and stretching and everything that we've done. And so our internal franchisees get to continue to grow their business. And then, we also get to do something with all the lead flow that we get from people that want to partner with us, that we don't have a Pilates box to sell them. We now can sell them a yoga business or, with Rumble now, boxing, right? So we always give first look to our internal franchisees. When we buy a brand, give them the ability to expand wherever they would like. And then what's left over, we go out to the public. So today, we launched on, Rumble's Instagram or Rumble to the Rumble members, things like that. So we'll progressively start to expand our marketing efforts little by little in these brands as we're able to.
Yeah, it's a great concept and definitely want to get into all those various moving parts. I thought it was interesting and wanted to touch on, even before Xponential, you were involved in the fitness franchise space with LA Boxing that was acquired by UFC Gym. Can you just talk a little bit about what insights you took from that and the opportunity around building a much bigger business and holding company in fitness studios?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was a member of LA Boxing in 2001, 2002, and loved the business. Ended up buying it and opened a second and a third location. And then I was out of money and had to kind of figure out, how do I open a 4th or 5th location? The businesses were making enough, but I would have to probably save for a year to 18 months to open another location. And I wanted to have more than, 1 every 18 months. So it kind of lent me to franchising, where I could work with another group, somewhere else in the country and, kind of launch the brand there and scale it. So I started doing that. UFC Gym had launched at some point, after that, and they had done a big box version of, kind of boxing, kickboxing, MMA, and a bunch of other stuff. It was a lot different than an LA Boxing. It was more like a 24-hour fitness, with a UFC flag on it. And so, they had Zumba dance and group X rooms and showers and, where we had 2 treadmills, they probably had 20 or whatever, right? So it was a big box, and, they looked at, what does it look like if we have a small franchise box? And they were also corporate. So we ended up talking, and we converted all of the LA Boxing franchises into UFC gym. And then, of course, they had their big boxes and they began to expand on their big boxes. But the offerings were quite different in the regard that at the old LA Boxing box, the franchise box, we only did a small portion of what, UFC gym did. And so post-acquisition, I was president of UFC gym franchise and ran that business for about 14, 15 months. And they wanted to bring somebody else in to run the business that they thought would do a better job. So I exited the business after about 14 months and then sat home for a little while, 5, 6 months. My wife was pregnant with our first daughter and just kind of enjoyed that process until somebody came along and said, "Hey, can you help this lady that is in San Diego? She owns this brand called Club Pilates." And quite honestly, I didn't really know what Pilates was at the time. And I wasn't too excited to take off a UFC shirt and put on a Pilates one because I was like, I don't even know what this is. And, UFC was kind of the ultimate of cool. And Pilates was not, especially 6, 7 years ago for a guy. So I looked at the business, but really liked the business and the model and looked around and said, "Hey, look, there's a ton of Pilates studios, but there's not a Coca-Cola in the industry," right? And that's what I always said about boxing. When I started LA Boxing, there's a lot of independence, but there was no brand. There was no national presence. And so, if you look at yoga today, there's Core Power Yoga, let's say, as a national brand. There was Yoga Works, which wasn't all that big even before they filed bankruptcy, or it wasn't the size of Core Power. And so you look at that and you say, okay, same thing I looked at in yoga. I was like, well, there's nobody franchising yoga, right? And there's nobody, there's no national brand other than Core Power. So it's just always a bunch of independents. And so I looked at it and said, well, taking these independent Pilates places and creating a national brand is not any different than what I did at LA Boxing. And I learned a lot, obviously, going through the paces at LA Boxing. I spent, I started that in 2002, 2003 in that business, began franchising in 2004. And by the time I left, it had been 10 years. I left in UFC in 2014. So, I'd spent 10 years kind of trial and erroring it. It wasn't like you go to school for how to be a good franchisor. And so you learn by doing everything wrong and not doing more wrong stuff. And you figure out what you did right and you do more of the right stuff. And I don't think it was a whole lot different than that. And, in trying to scale that company.
Sure. In a matter of learning by doing and just having been in it, that kind of operator experience is second to none. One thing is it kind of takes shape, right? You get involved with the Pilates business, go in and acquire it, thinking big vision about this national brand. At that point, how did you and how has it evolved? Think about financing this, right? You want to build this holding company that can go out and potentially acquire other brands and build them into national names. What was that like and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah. So the good news is that, I made a lot of money off of my UFC deal. And so capital at that point wasn't an issue. Originally, when I started LA Boxing, and you start with one, you take the money from one to do two and do three, right? You kind of have that organic growth that I think all of us go through. And then I began franchising for that access to capital, right? You're using the franchisee's capital to go open another store. And so that was how I capitalized that business. Coming into Club Pilates, I had the few $1 million that it was to, kind of get that business up and running to where it was profitable, and it grew pretty rapidly. So we never brought on any capital at Club Pilates. So we didn't have any debt. We were cash flowing. The business was putting off money. And then TPG came in, and TPG wanted, originally El Catterton was the original person that came in. TPG came in as well. Ultimately, TPG ended up acquiring Club Pilates. And the day after they acquired Club Pilates, TPG and I created Xponential. So it was a part of the plan from the beginning, because after Club Pilates, I also didn't have a big interest in just remaining there, right? I'd already gone through that at LA Boxing and UFC. And, my analogy for that is that usually when you sell your home, you move out of it, right? And you don't have to watch what people do to your house when they remodel it. When you sell your business and you stay in it, my analogy to that is that you sold your home, but you no longer get to live in the master bedroom. You get to live in one of the guest rooms or one of the extra bedrooms. And of course, the new buyer of a home, just like the new buyer of a business, they come in and they say, hey, the kitchen should be this way. The flooring we should repaint it. We should do these things. But like I said, when you sell your home, you don't have to live through that, right? When they move in with you, you live through it. And so with TPG, I just kind of said, hey, look, you guys come in and buy Club Pilates, and then, I have to run it the way you want to run it because you own it now, right? And I go from being an owner to an employee, and I don't know how well that's going to work out. So what was more compelling was I've done this with LA Boxing. I've done it with Club Pilates. Can I do it a second, third, fourth, fifth time? And can I do it all at the same time as well? And that challenge, me sitting there going, well, crap, I don't really know if I can do it, right? I don't know if I can do it 9 times over like I have now today. And I don't know if I can do it all at the same time, right? It's one thing to do something one at a time and then move on to the next one and one at a time. It's another thing to be running 9 independent businesses, all different modalities, all different brands under one portfolio. And we did it in a very short period of time. We acquired Club Pilates, and we acquired the next 7 brands over about an 18-month period of time. So, you went from having 12 employees to 200 employees, right? So there's a lot of hiring, there's office space to put them in, there's the actual acquiring of the brands. And if you buy 7, 8 companies, that means you probably looked at 80 companies, right? So it was a ton of work. And so originally Xponential, was capitalized with TPG and myself. And then we ended up taking on some debt from a lender in order to acquire some more of the brands. But the good news is after TPG and I capitalized the business, we never put more money in it. And to this day, haven't had to put any money into it. But to this day, I've also haven't taken any money out of it. I still continue to earn a $400,000 a year salary, which is good. It's a lot less than maybe somebody would be taking out of this business, but we've continued to put 100% of the money that comes out of this company back into growing the business and supporting the franchisees. And so at some point, TPG and I, we were looking at buying some more businesses, and I wanted to buy Pure Barre, I wanted to buy yoga, wanted to buy Stride. And there was a partner at TPG who was going to be leaving the company. And I really liked him and thought, this will be it could be a good partnership. So we put together the crazy idea of me and that partner at TPG buying the business from TPG, buying it back. So we did that. And so we raised some capital to, go in and buy the business back from TPG. And so TPG and I were partners for about a year. And then, since for the last couple of years, we've had the business back and been operating it kind of independently.
Yeah, I remember there was a period of time there, maybe 2 years ago now, where it was every other month announcing an acquisition, a new brand coming on board. So yeah, it was definitely crazy to watch. Recently talked with the founder of Outside, which was prior to that, Pocket Media. They had the same thing. I think they acquired 20 companies, publications. So not brick and mortar businesses, which is way more complicated. Looking at the holding company model, I've recently talked to Jason Karp at Human Co. And so they're like a health and wellness brands focused on kind of food, CPG. Brian Kirkbride at Fit Lab, they have like kind of performance oriented brands. Xponential set out to do this with boutique studios. Can you just talk about why ultimately you set it up as like this holdco structure, how some of those synergies play together, and what makes it successful?
Yeah, I don't know that there was any kind of big plan to have like a holdco structure as much as it was that I owned Club Pilates and then I bought CycleBar and I bought the next one, right? You got to put them somewhere. Originally, Xponential wasn't even, no one was even supposed to know the name of it, right? But we needed to have a place to put all of these assets. And so they all end up being under Xponential. And then when we went to do our first convention in Las Vegas, which was a real estate convention, and you're kind of designing the booth and they're asking you what your company's name is, it's really hard to say, well, we have 8 different names, right? And put 8 different things on the booth. And so the parent company at that point kind of started to come out. And then as we, started to acquire all these brands, everybody naturally starts to talk about, well, if you own 8 of these, then, if I sign up at Pure Barre, why can't I go to CycleBar or Club Pilates, right? If it's all the same owner. And so that was when the XPASS evolved, which was interesting because if the name hadn't been Xponential or we hadn't put it out, I don't know that it would be an XPASS, but we had this big blue X that was a part of the design of the Xponential holdco name. And so it just evolved internally to be called the XPASS. And, we couldn't think of a better name, and the name grew on us, and it seemed like, the right name to have. So we ended up launching XPASS, which simply put is if you buy a membership at one brand and you upgrade to the XPASS, you get to, enjoy a membership at all of our brands and all of our almost 2,000 locations in the US.
Do you have a sense of how many people, take advantage of that in terms of usage?
Yeah. So, it's hard because we're still in a COVID world from a business standpoint, right? And still as a social standpoint. And we launched it in Q4 of this last year, in Q4 of 2020. And then we've been opening up to different demographics. So, as you end up in states like Florida or Texas with the XPASS, the usage is a lot higher than if you open it up in Northern California or in New York City, right? And so it's very scattered and hard to tell. We think it'll be amazing. We don't see any reason why people wouldn't want to do it. The people that are doing it love it, but the DMAs are a bit off right now to have a very solid sample set. It's just kind of too early to, look at anything in this COVID world. If it wasn't a COVID world, we would have 7 months of data so far, which still wouldn't be a ton, but it would be consistent. But with opens and closures and all that kind of stuff, it's been pretty scattered, but people are utilizing it. Definitely love it.
Yeah, certainly a great concept and kind of TBD as things get back to normal. You mentioned acquiring Club Pilates and then the holdco kind of evolving organically. But when it comes to adding those additional brands, you mentioned at one point, you wanted to buy Pure Barre and you were looking at yoga and Stride. What's the process like to identify these concepts and modalities? Is there a framework that you use to evaluate the brands? Take us behind the scenes with that.
Yeah, we kind of have a proprietary process now that, when I go to acquire, just like we did Rumble, we're working on a few others at this point. But as we put people through the process, it's really, we put it through like a conveyor belt now, right? And it's like, you got to be able to check all the boxes for us to do it. And now we have so many brands coming to us on a weekly basis saying, hey, I'd like to be acquired by Expo. Kind of here's what I can do. So we kind of created this application, but it's pretty simple in the regard that, we start with the modality first. We don't really typically start with a brand first. So like even in the case of Rumble, people thought it was interesting that I didn't do boxing, as a part of the 8 brands. Some people thought I had a non-compete, which I didn't. I was just over the modality of boxing. Like I'd done it so much and so hard for a decade plus that I was just, I wasn't as interested in it as a modality. And then I started to get interested in boxing again as a sport and started to watch it on TV again. I got the Mike Tyson fight, all those things were happening. And I was also talking to the guys at Rumble, but I'd really been talking to them for, at this point, it's been like 14 months. So I was talking to Eugene and Andy just about the industry and that kind of stuff, probably once or twice a month, just sort of communicating with them. And then I started getting excited about boxing, the modality. And so that's what really starts is for us is the modality. And then we go out and look, right? So we say, okay, we're excited about boxing, the modality. We think it makes a lot of sense. We think a lot of people are doing it. I think the brands that are out there in boxing today, even national brands, are tired. And I think there needs to be a fresh concept and a great brand. It's one thing to run the modality. It's another thing to have a great brand, right? And so, we go out and we start to look at who's in the world of boxing and, who has a great brand, who has a great presence, who has a great programming. because we want to fall in love with the modality, and then we want to fall in love with the brand, inside of that modality. And then we look at the economics, right? Because these things ultimately, at the end of the day, they have to make money. No franchisee gets into business to lose money. So we want to make sure that they make money. And so we dig into the economics. We dig into the build out, right? To see, what does this thing cost to build? And then ultimately we decide based on the numbers that they're doing, what we're going to offer the sellers, right? And we also like to make sure that we have willing sellers. It's a lot easier when there's less owners or decision makers for the business. We've looked at several different types of companies, and there's 8 owners and 6 of them don't like each other and they're trying to run a business. And it's like our chances of getting all 8 of them to agree on something to get a deal done aren't very good. So those are kind of red flags for us. In this case with Rumble, we had 2 people primarily that were running the business and could be decision makers. So, and they were aligned on what they wanted to do. So that makes it easier. It is much harder to buy a business from an independent operator who's a founder and created the business than it is to buy from a bank, for instance. So when I bought Pure Barre, I can't say what I paid for Pure Barre, but I paid a lot of money for Pure Barre. And when we did that acquisition, it was our biggest acquisition at the time. And it was a big gamble for us, 500 plus locations. But doing that deal was a lot easier dealing with El Caterton, with a private equity firm that owned it, than it was to, for instance, buy Row House that had 2 locations or Stretch Lab that had 4 locations. Because the founder that's there, my analogy to it is like, this is their child, right? Like they gave birth to this brand, this modality. It's blood, sweat, and tears. It's not what they do, it's who they are. And you're coming along saying, hey, I'm going to buy your kid and I promise I'm going to go raise him right. He's going to turn out to be a good human being. Oh, and by the way, you don't know me, So it's tough. It's tough. I know we've had founders that are getting paid millions of dollars the day we're closing, and they should be jumping up and down, excited that they're now a multi-millionaire or they're worth tens of millions or whatever it is. And instead they're conflicted on whether or not they should still do the deal, right? Because it's all about who they are. And it's very tough to get those kinds of deals done. So, it's kind of been the difference in buying CycleBar, which wasn't really from the founders, or buying Pure Barre, which isn't from the founders. Those deals were a lot easier to get done, more commercial deals. And the Rumble guys were sophisticated guys. And so that deal was easier to get done. But when you have, smaller brands that someone has grown out of their backyard and they drew the logo, they thought of the name, all those things, a lot of times it's a lot tougher.
Sure. And almost different case by case as well as you go through the process.
Yep.
You kind of hinted at it there. It was kind of an obvious follow-up from my end was, are you going to acquire more brands? You kind of said, we're already looking at things. Anything you can kind of hint at? I know who they are is off limits, but even in terms of like modalities, what's interesting to you at this point?
Yeah. I mean, a couple things interest me at this point. Like I think there's a market out there for what I'll call like a weight training type modality. So I think that makes sense. A gym, let's say, where, your boutique workouts are kind of like picking your parts, right? So you come in for arm class, booty class, ab class, whatever it might be, and you can kind of mix up your parts. Most guys always skip leg day, right? So they either don't have to do legs because it's not mandatory. They can pick, arms and chest and abs every day if they wanted to, or they could force themselves into the gym to do leg day since they'll never do it on their own, right? So we've been looking at modalities along those lines, which I think are compelling. We've been looking at different modalities that we already have to do acquisitions and then convert them over to our brand. Much like with Flywheel, for instance, when Flywheel went bankrupt, the brand Flywheel doesn't necessarily help us, but the locations do, right? And so, we took over a lot of physical Flywheel locations. We took over a lot of Yoga Works locations. because the acquisition for us in those cases are really a real estate and customer play more than, a new modality for us. So we're doing some acquisitions and have been doing some acquisitions or kind of integrations where we've been rebranding, if you want to call it that, kind of existing competitors into our brands. And then we've got a few that we're looking at, that'll be new modalities, but we will continue to grow Xponential, past its 9 brands in the future.
Yeah, I certainly want to ask about the impact of the pandemic, but just in this case, there's obviously been, the business hurt but by the fact that members can't go to the studios or they're being forced to close in certain states and cities. But it sounds like it has also created a number of opportunities for you to go out and maybe make an acquisition for a price that's well below what it have sold for in other times, or acquire these other locations. How has it played out in the way to kind of encourage the growth of Xponential, even though studios were closed?
Yeah, I mean, I will say we're very bullish, of course, on the industry and what we do. So it didn't really stop the acquisition process. Obviously, when the pandemic hit in March, no one knew how long or how deep or what the impacts were going to be. So, we paused anything we were doing in the world of acquisition. We wanted to make sure, first and foremost, we kept all the stores open, franchisees afloat, which I'm happy to say last year, not that anybody would wish 2020 on anyone ever again, or the pandemic, but what we thought we were going to be in for, as it kind of rounded out to April, May, June, because remember, originally it was, 14 days closed to flatten the curve. And so at that point, everybody was kind of like, oh, well, 14 days, that's fine. Like, we can weather that. No one knew it was going to turn into, 400 or 500 days. And so at that point, as we started to see, how it was evolving, we flipped immediately. We made a clear, conscious decision that, the storm was big, but our ship was bigger, and we weren't going to close down, furlough our employees, and kind of run in for safe harbor. We kept 100% of our employees on, making 100% of their money. And we stayed open everywhere we could, where it was legal to stay open. And we reopened as fast as we possibly could. So we were aggressive on those fronts. If you read the papers or watch the news, you'll see that when the Arizona governor decided to close down my franchisees, my 60 stores in Arizona, I turned around and I sued the governor in federal court to get my stores back open. No other franchisor did that. No other franchisor said, hey, I'm going to stand on behalf of my franchisees and I'm going to spend $1 million to go fight this in Arizona because it's wrong. Right. But we did that. It was time to be a good partner. And so we stepped up to be a good partner. And we also did that so that, we could let other governors know that, hey, if you're going to close us down and you're going to leave casinos open, tattoo parlors, liquor stores, weed shops, things like that, then it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. And if we need to stay open with certain protocols, then let's decide what those protocols are. So we were very aggressive in keeping things open. And we still, with the shift from physical to digital and outdoor, our members, God bless them, stayed with us because the community was so good. Our franchisees worked their ass off. Our corporate team worked their ass off. There was no sleep for months. And, when we did that, we still processed $435 million in system-wide sales last year through the stores during the pandemic while we were closed. And to give you scale, all of our franchisees combined brought in $18.5 million of PPP money, but they put $435 million through the registers at their stores. And that's what allowed us to not permanently close any locations. And we actually grand opened 250 locations last year during the pandemic. So it's, it was not the year we thought 2020 was going to be, but it was a banner year for us. Planet Fitness came out and said, hey, we opened 100 locations during the pandemic, and no other gym or boutique fitness company did that. But we did. We did that by 150% more than Planet was able to do. Now, granted, it's a bigger box, it's a bigger dollar amount, all those kind of things. And much respect to the guys at Planet. I think Chris is great, and I love what they're doing over there. They paved the way for a lot of us. But But from the standpoint of units that we did, we did a ton of openings when nobody expected us to open anything. They expect us to shrink, and instead we expanded, And so, I'm proud of the team, the franchisees, and very appreciative of what our members did for us, which allowed us to have no closures and enjoy growth in a year where we were part of the industries that were absolutely shut down.
Yeah, it was crazy year to say the least. You mentioned, just in general continuing to be bullish on the space and acquiring more brands, opening studios and bringing in revenue during the pandemic. A lot of what's kind of a conversation talking point that's going on now is the omnichannel future of fitness, whether or not you have something at home, digital or connected fitness, whether or not a brick and mortar location is also offering digital. Do you think that, one, do you buy into this? It's an omni-channel future. Do you think people are going to rush back kind of wholesale to gyms and studios? And do you ultimately think that brick and mortar studios can and should be competing with like digital first providers in the future of how people consume fitness content?
Look, I think it still remains to be seen. There is no doubt, right? Some things that I think are facts, right? It's a fact that there are people still at home that aren't leaving their houses. Whether, there's people that are vaccinated at home that don't want to leave their houses, right? So that used to be gym members, that used to be eating in restaurants, used to go to grocery stores. So that's definitely happening in the world. It continues to happen less and less, right? There are more people leaving, and we're able to track cell phone data. So you're able to actually physically, you're not just thinking it's happening, you're able to look in zip codes in cities and states and see how many cell phones were moving around pre-COVID, how many moved around during COVID, and how many are moving in the recovery, right? So you can kind of track a lot of that stuff to see it coming back. There's no doubt that we have stores out there that are back to and or exceeding their pre-COVID numbers. Demand is definitely much higher than supply. There are about, IRSA reports, there's about 25% of gyms that permanently closed, which means there's still a lot of, displaced members out there that are looking to sign up somewhere. There's also no doubt that there are a lot of people that, COVID scared them into wanting to be healthier. And so they said, hey, when it's safe to do so, I'm going to go join that gym down the street. Right. And so the demand that was there before is larger today than it was pre-COVID, given the fact that there's less supply out there, right? And given that there are a new group of people that want to work out. And so we get to see into the future a bit, because when you have places like Florida, much parts of Florida, many parts of Texas, and definitely parts of California, now with Manhattan reopening, we get to see in the future a bit because we know how these people return and that they are returning. But there will always be some digital piece. I personally believe that eventually, a lot of this digital, we'll see how it evolves. But, eventually there will be a digital component. That's why I love what we do, because, we have our own production studio, our own teams. We were launching digital pre-COVID, which allowed us to convert for members during COVID very easily and pivot very easily, as where some others didn't have that. We just happened to be in the right place in the right time, buying our own production studio about a year before COVID. And so we already had our XGo pass so that you could sign up at one brand digitally and get all of them. So we already had that happening, and we already had thousands of hours of content ready to go when COVID happened. But I think particularly I like where we are, where I have 9 brands. We've got almost 2,000 locations in the physical world, and we have a very robust digital business as well. So if you're a member who wants to continue to consume our content from home, that's great. You can do that. And we're continuing to pump out fresh content. We're filming, all day, every day. So, we're continuing to put out fresh content, and or you can go consume it in the physical world. And what we see is when we open up in places like Manhattan or, other parts of the country where we're capped on capacity. So in other words, we can only allow 25% or 50% capacity. some of our members are coming in. If they can't get a physical class, we see them online taking a digital class at the same time. So they try and get into the 5 o'clock. They can't get to the 5 o'clock because it's packed already, given the small capacity constraints that we have. And so then they just go ahead and take it digitally. But maybe the next day they actually show up physically. So the digital component has also allowed us to expand our capacity between both worlds, both digital and physical.
Yeah, and a quick follow-up before we wrap up here. Do you feel like there's any world in which you release some type of equipment, connected hardware? We've seen other studios try this, others that are going down that path. Is that even remotely in the kind of realm of what you want to get into?
I think there is a world that exists where that would happen, yes.
Okay, well, we'll be on the lookout for that. The last thing, and we'll actually get you out of here on this. There's been talk last year, you're going to go public, looking forward to an IPO. And then recently kind of reports that you've revived that. Is 2021 a year that's going to happen? Is it just kind of, on the roadmap and you're working towards it? What does it look like on that front?
Yeah, look, I think we all know that I can't comment on an IPO if one was happening, right? Either way. But so our official statement has been, even last year when Bloomberg quote unquote broke that story or wrote that, the company has, we don't comment on IPOs or what we're doing on that side of the business. But I think, we're always focused on how do we grow our business? How do we acquire capital to grow our business? Those kind of things. It's always a concern of any company. But as far as specific to an IPO or, what was reported by Bloomberg, we just, same thing we told Bloomberg, which was, hey, look, I can't comment on an IPO at this time. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll certainly be following along with that, whether it's the IPO, additional brands coming online, even now hinting at maybe connected hardware at some point. So certainly a lot for us to think about and watch along with, but appreciate you making a few minutes today, Anthony, and really grateful for the time.
Great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more from Fitt Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.